on the call today. Alex having his software development engineer experience, he could probably ask better questions than I can when it comes to that. I will get more information. I see a question about the mini project. I will get more information on that. I have asked, and I will also relay that on the Slack channel. So to get started, we have Shea Belsky. He's a passionate developer and accessibility advocate. He is a CTO for Mentra, which is on a mission to connect 100,000 autistic job seekers with meaningful work opportunities by 2025. He's a graduate of Cornell University with a Bachelor of Science in Information Science, with a concentration in user experience and a minor in education. He holds a Master's of Professional Studies in Information Science as well. And in the past, he's worked for companies like Wayfair and HubSpot as a software engineer. Welcome, Shea.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to meet everybody and to talk a little bit about my background and also answer any questions that you'll have. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So Shea, let's get started with, the basics. How did you get into tech and your journey in tech?
Sure. So I studied at Cornell University, which was an interesting journey because I didn't want to originally study computer science. I always wanted to explore more of the intersection of software and programming as it pertains to how people know what problems they're solving. How do you know that you're doing the right thing, that you're solving the right problems? And then how do you know when you're actually solving these problems? And the program at Cornell University is very well positioned to focus not just on computer science, but on the arts and humanities and that intersection of programming and then thinking about it from an ethical perspective, from a moral perspective, and also from a business perspective. They have concentrations in user experience, data science, and ethics, law, and policy. There's a lot of overlap between their program and traditional computer science, psychology, art, communication, science, and technology studies, lots of overlap. And that's where I really fell in love with programming, and then also the art of product design and product development. As I'm sure folks here are getting used to, designing and figuring out how do you actually build an application is not as simple as hopping into the code. You have to figure out what problem are you trying to accomplish? What are you solving for? Who are you solving for? And then how do you validate you're doing the right thing? And Cornell is where I got a lot of experience doing that through them and then for other volunteer organizations outside of Cornell, through project teams, through just civil service work and volunteer work. That's where I really fell in love with coding for good, coding to make an impact and make a positive change on people's lives. After graduation, I worked at Wayfair, where I was there until the summer of 2021. I was there for the pandemic when everything exploded in terms of people staying home. Then I went to HubSpot, where I worked on more of their marketing, social media side of things. And then March of this year, I found myself working for Mentra, where I'm making the biggest, most meaningful changes I can for folks like myself. I am autistic, and being able to work on a platform that's transforming the lives of neurodivergent job seekers like myself is a really big deal. And neurodivergent in this case means anybody who has autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. It covers a lot of conditions that affect how people think or act or perceive reality or the sensory differences.
That sounds amazing and sounds like you did so much in a short amount of time. But that sounds great. Yes. So let's get into being neurodivergent and working in tech. Your experiences as that, anything you want to share? Was there triumphs and difficulties?
It's interesting being a neurodivergent in the workplace, and it's also a different experience if you know that you are neurodivergent versus if you don't and you only suspect it. At the time that I came into my first job at Wayfair, I was pretty comfortable with my identity as being neurodivergent, so I had to make it very clear to managers up front about what that meant for me, because otherwise it feels like you're just like dropping a big load in someone's lap and walking away. Unfortunately, we live in a world where people associate a lot of bad and negative things with disability very generally, neurodiversity being one of them. So if I was just going to say, hey, my boss, I'm autistic, and walk away, it doesn't really help them. But now if I ever have a new boss or something else happen, if I disclose that I'm autistic, I say, hey, I want you to know I'm autistic, and this is where I need the most help, professional development, or this is where I struggle the most. So don't hold me to account for too much of these things. But I'm trying to help them help me as much as possible in that sense, to the extent that I have the most self awareness. And that is a journey of self discovery. It is knowing, how does your neurodiversity affect you? How does it come across to other people? And what can you do about it? And also, what can't you do about it? Because some things will be out of your control, and that's just the way it is. Some things you can at least try to steer the ship a little bit. So, with my boss, I did as much as I can to say, this is what I want you to help me with. And these are some things that are kind of outside my control, and I want you to be aware of just to keep me accountable. So, it really kind of varies based on your, I guess, self identification with it and how aware you are of it and how it affects you. And the more aware of it you are, and the best that you can translate it to your boss or to your peers, the most success you'll find, because it'll make it easy for your peers, make it easy for your boss, so they can best help you and best build a supportive environment for you to succeed in.
Well, sorry, I wasn't able to unmute myself earlier, but hopefully we fixed that issue. Yeah, that's amazing. Have you encountered any difficulties with that in the past, and how would you communicate to someone else that's in your position to get through some of these obstacles that might come up being neurodivergent and maybe being in a workforce that doesn't really understand or cater toward that?
So most people who I've interacted with are at least aware of it. What I say is that everybody knows somebody who's neurodivergent in some way, or they are neurodivergent themselves. Everybody almost knows somebody, because whenever I mention I'm autistic, they're like, oh, my nephew, my cousin, my brother, my sister, whoever it is. Everybody always says, oh, my someone is neurodivergent. And it almost always comes up. So everybody has an awareness of it, but not everybody knows how to translate it effectively. What I have found is that lots of organizations, lots of companies have employee resource groups or business resource groups or other unofficial or official communities for people who have disabilities very broadly. And those can be great sources of people who come together to help be each other's advocates or help someone become a better self-advocate. And in companies where those are a resource, I absolutely recommend finding them and leveraging them to run things by them, to say, I'm going through this with my boss or my team, am I crazy? And they can help you brainstorm ideas to resolve it. They can help get you connected with anybody in HR who can help you, or they can just be a sounding board and just listen if there isn't anything that they can do. When it isn't available, typically HR knows the most about how to help you with these things. If you don't have an ERG or a BRG, HR should at least be able to help you get the accommodations or the support structure that you need to be successful, even if your boss or team doesn't really know how to do that. At least your boss should know enough to connect you to HR and get that going. And at worst, you need to have a conversation with HR to make your case based on what you need to be successful. And if you're finding that HR is being combative and they're trying to drag you down rather than helping you, it might not be a place for you to have the most success, in all honesty.
Right. I assume that this is something that probably comes up in the interview process, something that you would bring up.
It does. It definitely is something that I come up as like a cell filter. The way I see it is that I'm pretty open about it. And if someone doesn't want to work with me because I'm autistic, I don't want to work with them. So it makes it very easy for me. Either you acknowledge my difference and you acknowledge what sets me apart from my peers and we can work together on it, or you're afraid of it for whatever reason and you don't want to work with me. In that case, fine, I don't want to work with you either. It actually makes it very easy. And it's definitely a varied set of responses based on what I say. I've had companies ghost me after I mention it. I've had companies go really over the top to make sure that I get the support that I need in an interview. I've had companies not acknowledge it at all, but then nothing changes. It really kind of varies in the company, and no two responses are exactly alike. But in the worst case scenario, where I don't want to work with you, it's a good sign that you missed something that could have been really bad had you not said anything. But in a really good scenario where someone sees what you bring to the table and wants to keep talking with you because of your strong talents and differences, then that's a really good sign that they value you for you and what you bring to the table.
Absolutely. I think like getting airing those things out on the table earlier on in the experience just saves everybody the time and the heartache of spending time going through all these interviews and doing all this for a company that you probably don't even want to spend time working for.
Oh yeah, so many companies have just said peace after I mentioned it because they've gotten really like clammy and chill that I mentioned. And like, oh, okay, like everything changes after I mention it, and then at that point, I can tell that it's not a place for me, and I can wrap it up very quickly after that. But some companies are
Yeah.
all over it. It really kind of depends.
You know, it's interesting. I think you have a really good perspective being neurodivergent. I'm sure that plays a role in how you design and create software. And what Lorraine mentioned accessibility. And I think accessibility is something that's not thought about as much as we'd like to think that it is. I've worked on software where I ask questions about accessibility and they're just like, yeah, we don't really worry about it too much. This is a really small scale application. But I think it's always important whether your application is built for 100 people, whether it's built for 100,000 people, to have accessibility in mind. Because if you're eliminating even just one person from accessing this piece of software because it's not accessible to everybody, I think that's doing a disservice. So what are some things that you think of in terms of accessibility, some things that maybe people who aren't too familiar with accessibility, what can they start thinking about in terms of that when approaching building software?
Accessibility comes up all the time. That's what I'm going to say. So if you think it doesn't matter, you need to change your mind because it does matter. Exhibit A, Twitter, Elon Musk just let go their entire accessibility team, the whole team. And that's never happened before. And it's unprecedented. And now you're going to start to see lawsuits come up because of this, because Twitter it's okay, it's not public traded anymore, but they still have investors and they still have people to whom they are beholden to. And they're going to start to come calling when their customers, their users, who have a variety of different disabilities, find themselves unable to use Twitter's platform for a variety of reasons. Let's just say that Twitter has several billion people, and easy numbers, let's say only 10% of them have a disability, there's still several 100 million people who cannot use the platform anymore because of a decision that was made at the very top level. And accessibility matters always. And believe me, it will matter when lawsuits come calling and you find yourself having to pay a much bigger bill than you would have if you had just spent time and energy to build accessibility in from the ground up. And the step before that is to always build accessibility in from the ground level and not an after fact. There's things that are called accessibility overlays, which are not good solutions to accessibility. It's not a band-aid. It's not something you can really just fix by slapping a plugin or slapping some JavaScript scripts or packages into to solve it. You have to think about it earlier on. And more directly, what that means is, are you adding meaningful alt text to images? Are you designing things for color blindness? Are you designing things where there's either low motion or the ability to control how much motion or animation something has? Is your copy text, is your text easy for someone who has a hard time processing things to understand, whether they speak another language or they just have a hard time processing language? Is your content structured in a way where the flow of information is logical? It's not just about code, but it is about the design. It is about the architecture from an information perspective and how you approach going into it with a variety of disabilities, not just autism like myself, where it doesn't come up as much, but for more obvious disabilities, whether you're blind or deaf or have some physical handicap where you can't use a traditional keyboard mouse like most of our people can. So there's a couple really ground ways to fix that. And like alt text, color, motion, those are the easy things to do. It's not comprehensive by any means, but if you're thinking about at least those three things, it's a great step in the right direction.
I completely agree. I remember first learning HTML and always skipping over those alt tags and not really knowing what those were there for. And then just learning about accessibility and now, you know, I try to make an effort to pay attention to those little things. You know, how does a screen reader interact with a website? Can you navigate through the website with your keyboard if you don't have a mouse, if you can't use a mouse?
If you ever want to know how a website works, like try using a screen reader with it. Take like an hour to learn how the screen reader works, and then browse a website that is definitely meant to support it, like Wikipedia. I use Wikipedia as an example because they are a good baseline for how should I browse a site with a screen reader, which is kind of information dense. If you can browse Wikipedia over a screen reader, then use it on your own site to see how does the flow of information go if you can't see the content. Or better yet, like just cover your eyes and do the same thing, because that's not analogous, but it gets you pretty close.
Right. Yeah, and then you mentioned like some websites that have a lot of motion, especially the first website that comes to mind is Apple. When they first release something, you're scrolling through their products and just animations coming in and out. If there's no way to disable those, if there's no way to disable those animations, that could be an issue for sure. But yeah, go ahead, Lorraine. I just wanted to explore that little aspect. I thought that was
no, and it's a great topic. Yeah, it's a great topic because although accessibility, we sometimes think accessibility is for people who might need it, which is where it kind of derives from, but it's really for everyone. I love closed captioning. I use elevators. I mean, everything that is normally made for somebody because they have a disability or a need, but it ends up being, you know, for everyone.
Oh,
another way
absolutely.
to think about it too is temporary disability. Say you're pushing a stroller, you're pushing someone in a wheelchair, you become temporarily disabled by the fact that you are now altering your mode of transportation. If you break a leg, break an arm, you can't walk or move the same. If you break your right hand, you can't use your right hand to browse the web. So what are you going to do? So another way to think about it as well is temporary disability, which affects pretty much everybody at some point in their lives in one way or another. And sometimes it's small, sometimes it's big. So if you think because disability doesn't apply to you, it has, or it will, or it is.
Absolutely. And so this kind of brings me a little bit back to what you were saying before, when you would speak to employers. You seem someone who's very confident and comfortable in your skin. What would be some advice for someone who either is never, maybe they have, they're neurodivergent, but haven't realized it or haven't had a diagnosis yet. And they think maybe it's just panic or it's anxiety or, you know, they're just not good at interviewing, but in reality, it could be something else. So what advice would you give for someone who is going through the interview process, who might have difficulties with certain things, like how to approach that? Do you email the person, like you said, you sometimes email ahead of time? Do you get to the interview and then say it at that moment? What would be your advice in that?
I do recognize that you mentioned diagnosis. I recognize that diagnosis can be very cost prohibitive, that finding a doctor who can do it and that is objective enough to do it can also be difficult to find in situations. So when I say firsthand that I get that, I can't just say get a diagnosis because it's not nearly that simple. And for folks, even for folks for whom they have a diagnosis, that even isn't even a whole solution because people will still be disbelief. You don't look autistic. Like people come up with all sorts of excuses as to why you don't look or act a certain way because we see stereotypes of what neurodiversity is supposed to look like. We see Sheldon at Big Bang Theory, which is one of the biggest disservices to neurodiversity that's out there. Then you have more authentic representations of neurodiversity. If you've seen Love on the Spectrum recently on Netflix, Extraordinary Attorney Woo, I think it's on Amazon Prime, are much more authentic representations because they feature actually neurodiverse people. More to the point of your question, I do think that it goes back to what I was saying before, where the more forward you are and the more aware you are of how neurodiversity affects you, it makes it easy for you to have a conversation or at least open a dialogue about it. You don't have to know everything, but in a good setting, in a good interview or a good managerial setting, they're supposed to be able to ask the right questions to help you, even if you don't know the questions yourself. I'm very aware of myself, but I would definitely say I'm an outlier there. I'm not at all like other folks who are maybe not fully understood about what their neurodiversity means to them. So I will say that if you do suspect that a typical standard interview process is going to be difficult or anxiety inducing or problematic for you, be forward about it and ask your recruiter or your boss and say, hey, I am autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, whatever it is. And in a perfect world, they're supposed to be able to come back to you and say, okay, what can we do to help you? Or they'll say, here's what we can do to help you and make it easy for you. You just have to pick. And that can mean if you're in a technical setting, some of my friends have had it where if they do like a code or pad hackering type of thing, they get the questions to those things in advance. And that way they have at least time to prepare and like fully become settled a little bit with the understanding that they're not actually doing the work beforehand, but they at least can have time to think about it and there's less anxiety or stress going into it. So I think the more forward you are, the better. You don't have to come in knowing exactly what you want, but in a perfect world, companies are supposed to be able to know how to help you. And if they aren't, then I think the more you can help them out, the better.
That's great advice. So I guess this will, let's transition a little into Mentra and their mission and how they're helping, how Mentra is helping the neurodivergent population.
Sure. So I'm autistic, our COO is autistic, and our CEO's older brother is a nonverbal autistic individual, and he is the primary reason why Mentra exists, so that one day we can find a meaningful, fulfilling job for our CEO's brother to have one day in life, whereas right now he does not have that job. To be clear, her brother is incredibly intelligent, incredibly bright. He speaks 7 languages. He writes incredible poetry, and he's very bright and talented, but he can't communicate like the rest of us. And that's the primary foundation for why Mentra exists in the first place. And what we're really trying to do is buck the traditional job application process, which for many diverse neurodivergent folks just doesn't work. So you fill out one application for whatever jobs that we have, rather than reapplying, and sending it into a black hole. Your information is almost always visible to a recruiter who is going for a search for whatever job it is. For example, we have 2 major tech employers right now, Wells Fargo, Ernst & Young, who are actively hiring software engineers through us for their roles. And with them, you don't even have to do anything special or different. They may ask you to do a couple different steps to get into their system, and then you have their interview process. But a lot of the heavy lifting is done up front by you one time. So if you wanted to apply for both EY and Wells Fargo, a lot of that work is basically done for you. And all you have to do is just watch your email if they do want to talk to you. A big part of what we also try to emphasize is making intelligent, meaningful matches. So on our platform, we ask, what accommodations do you need to be successful? What environments can you be successful in? Do you have diagnoses for different conditions, whether they're neurodiversity related or not? And more questions that focus on an individual's differences in neurodiversity than traditional job platforms like LinkedIn or Indeed ask. And then we also ask for the same information on the employer side, which almost nobody does. We ask employers, what makes you neuro-inclusive? What do you do to make sure that neurodivergent folks and disabled folks more generally are in an environment where they can succeed and thrive? Because it doesn't make sense for us to match you with a job where we don't think that someone could be successful or have long-term stability or growth opportunity. So we really try to emphasize with employers what we're going to ask them questions that then get shown to the job seekers, to all of you, to say, this is why Wells Fargo, EY are really good fits. And we really try to make those. And then after that, we're working on a matching system as well to make those matches automatically. So you can say, hey, based on your skill sets and your accommodations, and based on what EY is looking for and what they can provide you, we think it'd be a good fit, just as an example. And that's what we're trying to build up right now. We crossed the 4,000 job seeker mark over the weekend, and we're on a big roller coaster going up. It's pretty exciting stuff.
I love that. I love that you guys also make sure that the workplace is also a good fit, because you're really setting everybody up for success in that case. And that's an important piece of the puzzle that is definitely missing elsewhere.
Yeah, I think a big part of these programs almost always focus on the job seeker because that's one half of the equation. But unless employers are held to account, basically, there's no point, because we can have all the neurodiversity and all the disabled hire programs that we want to. But if people land with a job or they don't have the support structure, or they don't have people who understand what this means, or who just don't care, then what's the point? Because otherwise it's the same old thing and nothing's really changing.
Absolutely. So my question is, as far as for Mentra, I did, I was trying to go through your site, and we did share with our participants that Reskill wants to work with Mentra with any, crossover that we have with our participants also being neurodivergent, which I found very exciting to have this connection. So what if someone were to apply through Mentra or do the application process, and maybe let's say you guys feel that they're not job ready yet, do they get some type of notification, or do they get some recommendations, like maybe we can work on XYZ before moving on?
So one thing that we're trying to work on as well are partnerships with organizations that focus more on that. Mentra intentionally kind of leaves the upskilling side of things to other organizations who are far more senior to us and have that established territory, so to speak. But we are actively building relationships with organizations who can come in and support those sets of candidates who need, whether it's technical training or hard skills training, or it's soft skill, life skill, job readiness training for job seekers. So those relationships are still being actively developed even to this day. And we're really trying to focus a lot on like, how do we get people ready for those things? And then also, what is the most meaningful way of delivering that information? Because we don't want to come down on you and say, you can't use Mentor because of XYZ. We want to do it in a way where it's respectful to you so that we can find you the best job that is best for you based on what skills you have and based on areas of opportunity for you. So it really is a careful tightrope, because we want to be careful and recognize that some neurodivergent folks are just ready to go, but interviews aren't designed for them. And other people have all the technical chops, but need a lot of support for the interviews or on the job itself. So it's a balancing act that we're still developing even to this day. And companies these days pour so much money and time into these sorts of things, and it's still a tough case to crack. But we're working on it.
Is there a follow-up if a candidate goes to interview with a company and things don't work out? Is there some kind of support for that candidate in those types of cases?
Yeah, through Mentra, we really try to provide as much interview support and then post-hire support as possible, because that's another thing that gets missed. Once you get for these programs, like, all right, you're off into the big, great world, have fun. But for neurodivergent folks, if it's your first job, you're a small fish in a super big pond, and it can be really scary. That happened to me at Wayfair. I got a job at Wayfair, and I was like wide-eyed, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? And it was very daunting and scary. And I wish that I'd had the support that Mentra is offering to job seekers for the interview process. Once they get hired, we're always trying to stay in touch with folks to make sure that they can confide in us when things are tough, when they're running into challenges, and when they're not 100% what's going on. Because the last thing we want someone to do is feel as though they don't have anywhere to turn, whether it's within their company or with us. So we're really doing a lot to emphasize the fact that for job seekers, once they are in the door of the interview, and then hopefully once they're through the door with a job offer, we're still here for them in whatever capacity that they want to. And in a situation where interview doesn't go as planned, or if something happens on the job, we still also keep in touch with candidates as much as possible to help them work through problems that they're experiencing, talk with employers on their behalf if we have to, and just try to resolve any problems that are coming up.
Yeah, I love that. And maybe we've touched upon this a little bit earlier, but you just speaking about Wayfair and getting hired there, and that just being a whole new land. What are some of the key things in your life that you think really made you successful?
I think a really big thing that no one talks about is, and this is something that I struggled with exceptionally as someone who's neurodivergent, is communication skills and talking in a way where I sound like I know what I'm talking about to technical and non-technical people. Because in any interview setting, whether you're doing a purely software engineering interview or as you get more senior, you're going to talk with people who are not engineers, and you need to be able to convey to them your points. What work are you doing? Why does it matter? How does it fit into the bigger puzzle? And that goes so much beyond coding. My younger brother is studying computer science right now, and his first instinct to solve problems is like, let's jump into the code, let's just code it. And I'm like, well, wait, hold on. We need to figure out, like, what are we doing here? Just at a just like a base level English, talk about it like English. What are we doing here? what are the individual steps that we have to take to actually solve this problem, and how are we going to approach them? And only then can we actually start coding. Knowing what to code is a heck of a lot harder than actually coding it in almost all situations, because a lot of this code, a lot of this engineering stuff is often stuff that people have already done. The hardest part gets into combining these different patterns, different components, different structures, libraries, and putting it all into your mixing pot or your melting pot to, in just the right way and just the right composition, to actually get what you want out of it. And that is the super hardest part in an interview or on the job. And being able to identify to an interviewer or to your new boss what's going on is really going to take you far.
I love that you said that. I think architecture, like the big picture architecture, is really where the software engineering skills lie. When it comes to just building the small subcomponents, that isn't the most difficult part. And like you said, many of those things have already been done. If we need to go to Stack Overflow to remember how to do something, we could do that. But there really isn't a Stack Overflow post that shows you how to put all those components and big pieces of the puzzle together. And it all starts with thinking about things in English. How do we recognize what the problem is? And how can we put together a solution in plain English before we even touch the code? I think that's great.
I don't know if you can see my whiteboard here, but this is like basically like my stream of consciousness before I even get into the code. Is like, these are all the things that I know I have to do before I even get into the coding. Some of them are code and some of them are just like planning stuff. So this is I like whiteboarding because I like seeing it and I like sort of writing it out. But there isn't a Stack Overflow for how do you design this very high level system. But it helps to break the system down into smaller different things and get granular and granular enough until then you can start to define individual components to it. And as you go from being a junior, mid, senior staff engineer, the more you're able to like zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the more successful you'll be. Because when you get to that senior staff level, they're going to ask you very high level things. Design this really big system. And it's your job to figure out what are the individual parts that go into that. And how do you carve up the slices of the pie? And then how and to whom do you assign pieces of the pie to if you're in that position to make those assignments? I'm doing this right now, or Mentra is making a chat system. So I have to figure out what are the individual parts of chat that I have to develop in order to actually go ahead and implement it. And that's not an easy task, but I have to start with at an English level, what are the puzzle pieces that I can make to complete the puzzle? And then I have to actually design the puzzle pieces themselves.
Wow, that's amazing. And is this a chat service for somebody who's a part of the program to be able to chat with like some type of mentor or something through their application processes and whatnot? Yeah,
so a big part of it will be that you as a job seeker will be able to, right now through an email, right now, if you're a job seeker on Mentra and an employer wants to talk to you, they'll send you an email outside of that and there's no connection. But in the end state, you'll just get a message on Mentra saying EY or Wells Fargo wants to talk to you, and you can get push notifications. It's much more responsive. You'll get a text message maybe. It'll be a lot easier for you to stay alert and aware of these things and keep coming back to the platform rather than like falling into the black hole that we all know email is. If you get an email and you don't read it immediately, it's gone. And say goodbye to that and the 5,000 other emails you're not reading, because I'm guilty of that too. But the idea there being that it's much more present and in your face, and you're less likely to forget about that if you get a notification about it. So that's the goal that we're trying to solve there.
Absolutely. That's great. I love that.
I have a question. It seems, I know we've stuck with the technical part of it and the software development, but does Mentra help with job seekers that are not in tech, or maybe in tech, but not necessarily software development? Like in our program, we have a UX design track as well. Would somebody qualify to go through Mentra for a job search through that?
I know that we do non-tech jobs. Off the top of my head, I don't think we're having a UX specific roles right now. Doesn't mean there won't be. There's no harm in signing up and then getting matched to a UX job later at some point. But we are always adding non-tech jobs. To be honest, a lot of neurodiversity hiring programs are unfortunately focused in tech, and we're trying very hard to broaden that to companies and employers that have non-tech roles. For instance, we have an employer that's called Embark Veterinary. They do epigenetics for dogs. Think of it as like Ancestry DNA or 23andMe, but for dogs. And they're hiring a senior scientist in epigenetics. They're hiring a marketing manager through Mentra. Those are just two examples. We have the Autism Society of America hiring a director of corporate relationships and other roles like that. So we have a variety of tech, non-tech, junior, senior roles that run the gamut of these sorts of industries that we're always trying to add. And I will definitely admit that our emphasis is on tech, but that's more by accident and not by design. It's a function of the jobs that employers want to fulfill for neurodiversity, but we're trying to find employers that aren't necessarily in that space to connect their roles through us.
Very good. Thank you for that. So I'm going to go through some participant questions and see if you could help me answer some of these. We have a participant says that they worked as an advocate for an agency that fosters inclusion and independent living. So a huge part of that program led focus on high school youth with various disabilities. Do you work with any agencies like independent living agencies to help promote workplace inclusion?
Yes to all of the above. So Mentra is building out a very robust partnership experience to allow vocational rehab centers, staffing agencies, counseling centers, and things under that similar umbrella to have a place to, you would call it, manage all of their job seekers or all of their clients, customers, whatever word you want to use, and help them each individually find their own jobs through Mentra. So think of it as like a HR tool for people who aren't in HR to help them get their bird's eye view for all the people in their living center, helping them with the follow through for connecting them with the right jobs that they have, helping them with their application on Mentra, and just giving them a place to manage all their information. So we absolutely do have that experience built out. And we're actually in the middle of overhauling that by the end of this week. So I will put a link in the chat for you to send to whomever that is, if that's your organization or someone else. They can sign up today, but it's going to be very different in about a week or so. So I might wait until after Thanksgiving or so to try it again, because it's going to be very different in a week, because that's my thing right now. That's what I'm working on right now.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. No,
I'll put a link in the chat. I'll put a link in the chat anyway.
Okay. Yeah. I'll get all the information and then put it in our Slack channel.
Sounds good.
Okay, so next question is, do you have any suggestions on when to disclose that you're neurodivergent and how to highlight your strengths and explain the areas you need support in with smaller companies that don't have an HR department or don't have experience with neurodivergent employees?
So this assumes that you're already at the company. So I'm not going to talk about the interview side of things just for now. It assumes you're already there. In these smaller environments, as I mentioned before, it's helpful for you to understand how does your neurodiversity affect you. And if you don't know the answer to that question, it's definitely going to help you. Doesn't mean that you can't, but it makes it harder for you to get the help that you need if you don't know exactly how it presents in your life or in your corporate life. And that can mean a variety of things. For me, that means I work with headphones and I have to listen. I have to basically block out the sound if I was in a typical office environment. I work remotely right now, so it's honestly just more out of habit than anything. I like to listen to music. But if I was in an office environment 5 days a week and I had to listen to the din of the office space, I would say to my employer, hey, I need to have headphones on so I can focus on my work. And if I don't, then I'm going to really struggle. That's just one example of me saying, hey, I'm autistic and this is what it means for me. But other examples can include a different working environment. It can include a lower light environment. At Wayfair, for instance, they actually allowed employees to cover up these super bright fluorescent lights that were super hard to look at. It can include different setups for your desk. Can include more training for your boss at larger companies. For smaller companies, which don't have that amount of training and setup, if you have that relationship with your boss and further up the C-suite chain to your CEO, it's helpful to bring it up to both of them at the same time so they can both be as much of an advocate for you as possible and say to them both at the same time, hey, I'm neurodivergent and this is what that means for me. And I would love it if you could help me with these specific things. The more specific you can get, the easier it is for them to help you. I think it doesn't help you if you just say, "Hey, I'm neurodivergent," and walk away without saying anything else, because it doesn't help them help you. It is kind of a burden for them to figure it out. And if you've met one person neurodivergent, you've met one person. We're all different. So the more that you can do to help them understand what it means to you, it's going to help them the most. And if you don't know, you can still like tell them, but you have to have a plan over what you're going to say, as a matter of like, what do you want to get out of it? What are you looking for specifically? And that will help them help you more. Hopefully it answered that question.
Yes, thank you. Basically self-advocacy, and just know how to advocate for yourself, and maybe even being a little bit specific. Like you said, I think some people, you said earlier in the meeting, I think some people have misconceptions of what autism is, or a stereotype of what autism is. So I feel like you said, being specific and what your needs are can help employers understand, what modifications you need to be your best at work. So
a big part of the, you go ahead, sorry.
No, finish.
A big part of it is also that if you are in a position as a manager or as a boss and you have no idea what you're doing with a neurodivergent employee, then there's a bazillion resources online to help you out as well. There are companies that also come in and like embed themselves to make companies more neuro-inclusive as well. So if you're ever spinning around wondering what to do, there's a bazillion jillion things out there to help you as well. I could put some into the chat too as well if folks want to learn more about them.
Great. In order for, if our participants were interested in applying or working with Mentra at the end of our program, would they need a formal diagnosis, or can they just self-identify?
Self-identifying is fine.
All right.
Very rarely will an employer require a formal diagnosis. It hasn't happened yet, as far as I know. So self-diagnosis is fine.
Okay. All right. Let me think of what I have here. Let me look for any other questions. Okay, so what is the I saw on your website, I feel like I think it said like as far as finding jobs for people, there's like a certain percentage, like you guys are pretty successful so far, as far as working with employees and employers, I mean, with applicants and employers.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about that? Yeah.
I don't know what the latest stats are, so this could probably be higher or somewhat lower. But I think right now we've had like something like a 95 or 98% success rate when it comes to continued employment. So a big thing that we look for as well is, once we make the hire, how long are they staying at this organization after we make the hire? That goes back to making a meaningful match. We can just send people to jobs however long we want to, but if they're not successful or they're not happy, they're not going to stay there. So we really try to focus on making a meaningful connection. Whatever company it is that you get a job offer for, they should be able to support you for a year plus, and ideally into the future. But we really try to focus on that meaningful match. And I think we have somewhere around a 98% success rate when it comes to all the offers that we've been able to provision. And I think we've placed about 60, 70 people, if not more, so far. And the number goes up every day because of different jobs that we have that are getting hired for. I don't have this number in front of me, but I want to say it's 70 or 80 people.
No, that's amazing. No, it's great stats. Do you find, so, I noticed we have been talking a lot about people applying and employers, but not necessarily your coworkers or your colleagues. So one of the questions here is, do you find the employers you've worked for educated staff regarding the topic to create a more empathetic work atmosphere?
I definitely think a lot of that depends. I will say it depends. Some are better than others. With Wayfair, that got better over time. So when I came in, there wasn't as much about it. But as time went on, and as I spent time, and as others also spent time in their own disabilities, they became a lot more inclusive and aware and accepting of these things, and it became better over time. And it got to the point where people were really happy with it. When I was at HubSpot, and I will also say that Wayfair had an ERG about people with disabilities. So they had that from the moment I joined, and that was a really big group of people who were really focused on making an impact. HubSpot had the same thing. We had a community of people with disabilities as well, and they were all on board with that. It's an organization called Disability In, who they partnered with as well to really focus on becoming more disability inclusive and more aware of accessibility very broadly. And HubSpot had that from day one, and they were all on board with it. I interned at Google a long time ago. They also had a very large, robust community for people with autism and different disabilities as well. So every company I'd say has had something. It's a matter of what's the corporate buy-in, what's the like leadership buy-in, and that does kind of vary or it evolves. I've never had any like rejections or denials of it. Not saying that people don't reject or deny it for one reason or another, but I've never had someone question my disability or question someone else's disability. I've always felt like someone was willing to listen and understand and do their best. And more, to be honest, doing their best definitely meant different things to different companies based on what they were able to actually do about it. But I will say that it was never like a compromised or hampered effort. Everyone's always trying to do their best.
Great. Well, I think that wraps up any questions we have from our participants. Shea, I want to thank you for spending almost an hour with us. We really appreciate it. I'm excited for Reskill to work with Mentra and help any of our neurodivergent participants be successful in getting a job. So I really
Absolutely. I'm going to put a couple things in the Zoom chat here, and you can send it out to whoever you want to. I'm going to put my LinkedIn in there. People want to add me on LinkedIn or wherever. Definitely would love the connection. I'm more than happy to talk about this stuff in more detail. Please add me if you want to. I am putting the sign up link for candidates in there as well. I can actually wait. Do you want me to send it the sign up link now or later? It's up to you, Lorraine.
Why don't you email it to me and then I could set everything up and then put it on Slack when it's ready.
Okay, I will send you an email with that. I will put you in the chat the link for the partner because someone asked about that. So this is for that life skills or independent living program, which someone was asking about. So I will put that in that for the person who was asking about that. I think those were the links that I said I would post, but if I'm forgetting one, someone can ask me about it later.
Yes, thank you. One last question. Shea, your excitement about the program you are working on, are you able to talk about how you started it?
Is that about Mentra specifically or a different program?
I'm thinking it's the program you were just talking about that you're on now that should be done by Thanksgiving.
Oh, so what we're doing right now is the current partner experience. If you are a vocational rehab independent living related organization who wants to sign up for Mentor right now, the experience is kind of basic, just so we get your information and be sort of like keep you in kind of a holding pattern. So what we're doing right now is we're trying to make it much more of a self-serve process. What we're doing is you as a partner will be able to sign up for Mentra, verify your email, then you'll come in, we'll ask you information about your organization, we'll help you create a referral code. So the question has come up for Reskill America and other organizations, how do you sort of track all of your job seekers for your program? You can create a referral code for your organization that you can then send to other people. And then whenever someone signs up with your referral code, you'll be able to track them basically forever, and you'll be able to keep a tab on them basically. Right now, this idea of creating a referral code is a manual process that myself or my co-founders have to do. But in this new world, you'll be able to do that all yourself, and it will be a lot less effort on our side to do it, and you have complete control over the actual code, over whatever images display, and other configuration options. So we're really trying to put more power back into the partners' hands and make it easy for you to do your thing rather than having to go through us on it. And that solves a really big problem on our side where we have a lot of people signing up every day and we don't have the time to give everyone the experience that they deserve. So we're giving them the tools to do it, basically.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much again, this time for real. Thank you for spending the time with us and answering our questions, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I super appreciate it. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I'll put my email in here as well if folks want to email me at Mentra. And yeah, I really appreciated you having me. Thanks everybody for such the amazing questions.
Yeah, pleasure to talk with you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, folks. Have a great rest of your day or day, evening, wherever you're dialing in from.
Thank you. All right. Goodbye, everyone. I will keep you updated on Slack on our updates with our terms of service and survey questions and picking our next track. So I'll keep you all posted. Have a wonderful rest of your day.